Richard, you're on.
Little firm, big firm. And so tonight, I think it's worth your while to hear from the big firm and what it takes to grow a big firm, because that's the guy that's done it. And so with that, I'd like to just throw out how we came to start in the law. I accidentally found it, and because I got terminated, ended up starting a law practice. And every month I thought that this would be my last month in the law practice, and somehow it just kept coming. And so now, all these years later, I'm still in the practice of law and now a partner in a law firm. But what I'd like to do is have Ken, who's kind of been preeminent here in the Inland Empire of Southern California, and having accomplished some mighty fine accomplishments, give you his story about how he decided to come into law, and then we'll talk a little bit about what it takes to create a practice in the law. So with that, Ken.
Thank you, Richard. When he says big firm, in Los Angeles or San Francisco, our firm would be considered a boutique firm. We have like 56 lawyers. And as you know, there are law firms now that have over 1,000 lawyers. But for this area, I think we're the second largest firm that's headquartered in the Inland Empire area. So,
Big firm.
We'll say. Any of you interested or possibly considering a career in law at some point? Maybe a few, yeah. Well, basically Richard has been kind enough to write out a little outline here, which I'm having trouble reading, but basically how I got into law was not something that was planned in advance either. So as I grew up, I didn't really know anybody in the legal profession, and none of my family had any background in law or any of the related areas. And I never once thought about going into law or going to law school during my whole undergraduate years. I graduated with a degree in chemistry from Walla Walla College, and was very excited about science and math, enjoyed what I was doing. But I quickly realized that a Bachelor of Science wasn't going to get me very far in terms of the job market, so I started a master's program at the University of Washington in chemistry. And a couple things happen in life. Sometimes doors just open and you go through it, and that's how you end up making important decisions, and that was kind of what happened for me. But while I was there studying for my master's in chemistry, I looked around and I saw, and this was the early 70s, so you can see I've been around a long time. We had lab assistants and student teachers that actually already had PhDs, and they basically were not able to find their way into the market, so that was the first thing that troubled me. And another thing that happened is, while I had a little extra time, I enrolled in an undergraduate class, which was something like Introduction to Law, and it was a very inspiring type professor. And there were things that I was really interested in. I had always been interested in political science and history and politics, and this was a class where they just kind of exposed us a little bit to law. So basically, at some point, I had developed a friendship with a professor and talked to him about the possibility of getting into law. And at that point, I didn't even realize that you can go to law school with any kind of an undergraduate degree. Because I had always thought that you had to take business or poli-sci or something like that to prepare yourself for it. So he just said, if you're interested, why don't you go down and take this exam that they're going to have in a couple of weeks, and which is what I did. And to make a long story short, I applied to a couple law schools, after that, and just felt like it was the right thing to do. So even though it was late in the year, I was able to get into a school in Sacramento called McGeorge School of Law, and my wife and I packed up, and I had got married the year before I started my graduate program. So, and we had always been interested in moving to California. We grew up in Seattle, both of us, and so the door opened and we went through it, and went to McGeorge, and that's basically how I got into law.
All right, so I started my law firm when I got fired, and I had one credit card that had about $5,000 of credit line on it, and I used that to buy a desk, a fax, a computer, and a used copier that didn't work, and I paid somebody to fix it. So how did you get your start with the law firm?
I worked for a law firm doing a little clerking when I was in law school in Sacramento, and I really just didn't like the feel of a big firm. And my wife had relatives, one relative, her brother, who lived in this area. And I had a longtime friend that was one of my best friends, and he was living in Redlands. So we came down to visit him, basically looked at the demographics and saw that, and back then, again, and this was now the mid-70s, there just weren't that many lawyers at all in California. This was before the big proliferation and all of the changes that took place in our profession. And so I looked at the statistics that the law school had, and the ratio of lawyers to population in this area was really low. And so somebody sent me over to meet a couple of guys that were sharing offices. There had been 3 of them. One of them had been appointed to the bench. And he ultimately became my mentor, and his name was Bob McCumber, and maybe some of you have heard of him because he has obviously a connection to this institution, and his boys ultimately got into the law profession. But he had just been appointed to be a municipal court judge. And so there was an office with 3 lawyers, and now there were 2. They weren't a firm, they were just sharing expenses. And so I met with them, and they said, yeah, if you want to come aboard, here's what we'll do for you. And we worked out something that was about as low cost to start a business as you could possibly imagine. They basically had the law library, they had a couple of secretaries, they had the equipment necessary, just the bare bones. And they were sharing expenses, and they wanted a 3rd person to share the overhead, because running a law office of any size is very high overhead situation. And so that's something you always are worried about. The agreement that I had with them was that I would be responsible for 1/3 of all the expenses, but only if I made money, if I had revenues coming in, and it was a month-to-month basis, so that every month I would give them half of what I made, half of what I took in revenues, until I had reached my 1/3. And after that I could keep whatever I made. But if I didn't make it, I didn't have to make it up. So at first, obviously, you're new in town, you're just starting off, you're not bringing in anything for a while. And so they carried me. But then when I started bringing some revenues in, then I would pay half of what I made up until I was able to carry my 1/3 of the revenue. And that's about the easiest way that you can start into a practice that I could think of. So I was very fortunate. And basically that worked out we stayed that way for 2 or 3 years before we started moving on and building into something bigger.
All right, so let's recap here for a second. Neither of us really intended to go into the practice of law, right? Both of us just kind of accidentally found our way into it. Two, one of the things you should have noticed about what we're telling you is you didn't have to go through a residency. You know, like you go to med school, right? Or dental school or whatever, you know, you gotta do all this stuff. But you graduate from law school, you pass the bar, and you got licensed to kill and be killed. And so that's how both of us have started. Both of us have gone out into the practice of law, straight out of law school. I guess you've done some clerkship or internship or externships or something like that, and I've done at least one externship, so I had a little idea of what an inside of a law firm looked like. But we just jumped in cold turkey, both of us. So, and in both cases, I got carried too. I used my credit card to buy my stuff, as I told you, but I had my former employer that had fired me, actually gave me some office space. So I got some free office space, an office, no secretary, for a start. But I propose to you that if you look around in your life, as you're thinking about entrepreneurship, whether it's in the practice of law or not, you will find that there are people who will incubate you. And so, a lot of times, as we're talking through what it took to build our practices, build firms, and advise other entrepreneurs about what they're doing, I think you'll find out that the word relationship keeps coming up over and over again. There's relationships, some of which you already have, other ones are new ones that you don't even know you're going to have, and yet those relationships turn out to be some of the most important events in your life that provide direction. So, how about this? Gotta ask this question. Were you scared?
Well, of course. Fortunately, I didn't have a lot of debt, and you know, times are different now. I was able to, before I finished my undergraduate, I got drafted, and I was sent over to Vietnam for a while, and so I had the GI Bill, and I used part of it at the University of Washington. I used the rest at law school. And we had some debt, but when we came to Riverside, everything that my wife and I had was in the back of a U-Haul truck. And we had a car that we had bought in Seattle, so it didn't have air conditioning, and I remember it had black vinyl upholstery. So I can remember going to court in my suit sometimes on those hot days. But we were, I mean, now to get a legal education is pretty expensive, and most people come out with a lot of debt. So I know it would be quite a bit harder back then, but obviously if you have a lot of responsibilities and a lot of debt, it's a lot harder to take the risk that we did. But yeah, I needed a little bit of capital to get some equipment like a desk and the basics that you need in order to be able to see clients. And so I went over to my bank, which had been the Bank of America, and they said, well, I said, I'd like to borrow a little money so I can start a business. And they said, well, what do you have for collateral? And I said, nothing. And I also have some student loans that are with the Bank of America. So they said, well, nice meeting you, but sorry. And I went across the street ultimately to a place called Riverside National Bank, and I love community banks, and this is why it goes clear back to then. I sat down with this guy, and he said, well, what do you need? I said, I have $2,500. And he said, well, you know, you don't have anything, but you have your education, and we're a community bank, and we believe in trying to develop a relationship where if you're successful, you're going to be our customer, and you're going to send us people, so I'm going to loan it to you, signature loan. So wow. That's how I got my desk and the basic things that I needed, although my wife still jokes about the fact that I didn't have enough left to buy a wastebasket, so I had one drawer in my desk that was my wastebasket that I'd empty out a couple of times a week. But yeah, you could. I mean, back then, and now I think it's tougher because of the cost of the education. But yeah, well, we started with nothing.
So, DeVere McGuffin, you're the one that invited us here this evening, and you're the administrator of a credit union that you told us has been around for 60 years. Would you give a signature loan to a law student just starting out for $2,500? Would you go a little higher than 25 now? How much higher? 50? 25,000 signature loan. Hopefully what you're getting from what we're talking about here tonight is when you read business literature, the single biggest predictor of whether someone will be an entrepreneur or not is if their parent or parents were an entrepreneur. That's the single biggest predictor of whether or not you will be an entrepreneur. So for all of those of you who have parents that were not entrepreneurs, it's important for you to hear stories like this. And whether our story fits you or McGuffin's or somebody else's, the point is that it doesn't take as much money as you think. Of course, it always takes more than you got, and it takes a lot of courage, and then it takes relationships. And again, I want to make sure you heard what Ken just told you. He went across the street and made a new relationship with a new bank. He didn't take the no at Bank of America as the final say on his future. He went across the street to another bank, and that bank said yes. And that particular relationship you're going to find out how formative that was, because we're going to be ending about another relationship about a community bank here in a minute. So, what does it take to stay in practice, Ken?
It takes clients and clients that pay their bills occasionally. Yeah, and that's the challenge. When you come to a town like we did, and we didn't know anybody, we knew 2 people in the local area, you've got to go out and let people know that you're available and that you obviously are qualified to handle their legal problems. And that takes time. I was very fortunate, again, and I mentioned Bob McCumber, who is a retired judge, but at the time, he actually became my mentor. And what happened was, when he moved to the bench, he had one of the 3 offices there, and then they had 2, so they brought me in. They took all his good cases, and all the files that were still open that I called dogs were still there. And so ultimately I took them. And some of them were like old probates that hadn't had accountings for 5 years. And I just took the boxes home and went through them, and I finally got them closed and got the fees out of it. But what else? I did what everybody did. I went to the County Bar Association, got on a lawyer referral panel, and basically went out and joined a service club, so that I started meeting people and getting some business coming in the door. And obviously, when you're new, you don't get the best kind of cases, but at that point in time, I wasn't choosy. I wanted to really get the full spectrum of the legal practice anyway, so I did divorce, I did criminal defense, I did unlawful detainers, I did almost any, even some workers' comp, things that now are all highly specialized in our profession. So we don't have very many general practitioners anymore. They're almost extinct, but that was kind of how I just started looking for work and took what came in the door.
In our field, he was practicing what is called door law. Whatever came in the door. I kind of ended up going the route I ended up going because of some, I guess I'll call them supernatural experiences. And so since we're at a Christian university, maybe we wasn't really on our list. But let me just throw it out. Did you have a sense that God was somehow helping you with any of this at the beginning of all of this?
I don't really know if I did, but certainly I just felt like I was following my heart and not looking back. And rather than be apprehensive about the decisions I was making, I just said, here I am and I'm going to do it. But there are always things that look like, it's providential. When I found these people, and then Bob McCumber became my mentor and started telling me how he had developed his practice and giving me even some referrals. It was great. But basically, it's just grinding away and trying to do your best for every single client so that they're going to send their friends to you, and that's kind of how I did it.
Next question. What does it take to expand a practice? I got to tell you, I love this part of the story, I think, because I remember driving down Brockton Avenue in Riverside here, and here was this beautiful, I think it's 3 levels, right? 3-level building, but 10,000 square feet maybe?
Actually, it was about 35,000.
Oh wow, I'm really off. 35,000. 12,000 feet per square feet per level, 3 levels, that's 36,000. With some covered parking. Wasn't there some covered parking? No, no covered parking, okay. That was in my imagination. And I actually had a meeting over there once for some case shortly after you moved in there. I was jealous. I was jealous, Ken. It was beautiful. But tell us a little bit how you made the transition from having a couple guys float you while you're building a practice to actually getting a 36,000 square foot building with your name on it.
Well, it took a lot of years, because remember I told you I gave half of what I made at the beginning to the guys for the overhead. I think the first year I made $12,000. The second year I was in practice I made $30,000. But then it started to take off after that. And again, it's building relationships and trying to focus in and determine what you really like and what you're good at, and getting rid of some of the things that you never liked to begin with, but did it because you needed to make a living. But I ultimately hooked up with, first of all, one individual who wanted to be a partner, and he wanted to do all personal injury, and he had some connections around town, and I was willing to do most of the other kind of stuff. And at that point, I was still focusing in on business, which is what I knew that I wanted to do, business and corporate work, but I didn't have enough of it to be able to get rid of the divorces and this criminal defense. One quick story, my first jury trial, and I was doing whatever, like he says, it's door practice. My first jury trial was in Judge Maycomber's department. And it was a drunk driving case. I was defending the guy, and I got lucky, and he got acquitted. And even Bob was shocked, because he knew that I had messed up along the way, but the jury just liked this guy. So, but I always had him there to keep my feet on the ground and really to tell me how to improve. But I quickly found I didn't want to do criminal defense. I went all the way up to, I did a first-degree murder defense case in a gang shooting once. And I was able to get rid of that from my practice, as well as the divorce and the other things that focused. But as we built the practice, then obviously we could bring in another lawyer, and pretty soon we had 3 or 4 lawyers. And I had a CPA friend, and I developed a relationship. Being a business attorney, that's a good idea, because CPAs can bring you clients, and you can send your clients to them for their tax work. And I met this guy almost the first few months that I was in Riverside, and he took me under his wing, and ultimately he had his firm. We decided that we'd build a building together. And so we set up a building partnership. We built our building, and he had his accounting firm that had 1 floor, and I had the law firm on the top floor, and we had some additional space that we rented out. So we didn't have to worry really about carrying the debt on the building, because we leased it to ourselves. So that worked out well, and that's the building I'm sure you're talking about, which we sold when my building partner passed away a few years ago.
It might be helpful for you to get a sense of how law firms create relationships with attorneys, because again, if you don't come from an entrepreneurial background and you're not familiar with all the various machinations that you can go through in creating business relationship, you might be a little surprised. So Ken, maybe you can fill us in a little bit on when you say we added attorneys. I think most people automatically think, well, you added them as employees, and we're paying them minimum wage, but maybe you had some other business relations. Maybe you can just describe a little bit of different kinds of relationships you have when you add attorneys to a firm.
Well, there's different ways you can do it, but the way I did it is usually I was looking for people coming out of law school that I could employ. They obviously were looking for a job and were happy to work on a salary with, I always had incentives built in so that if they were, it was based on production. And so if they were good, then at some point you have to give them a piece of the business. You bring them in as a partner, or you're going to lose them. And being a small firm, you lose a high percentage of them anyway. Even a big firm, you lose a high percentage of them, because the grass is always green, and everybody has to find the right fit, and they have to find it for themselves, and they're not really going to be satisfied until they try different things. And so, you know, over the years, we tried to build a firm, and when there was somebody that was really contributing and good and had the standards and values that were important to us, then they would be brought in and basically be eligible for a partnership. And that's kind of how you build a firm. You're always looking for new talent coming in and trying to control the overhead, which is really difficult because you need other professionals, you need other staff in order to run a law firm. And that's why we charge so much by the hour. I mean, it is obviously just simple economics that if you want to do a good job and have state-of-the-art practice for people, there are certain things you have to have, and they cost money. So ultimately, got up to about 6 lawyers, and that was as high as I could go, as much as I could grow, without really spending a lot of money and raising capital to go to a bigger facility and expand the overhead. And as I was reaching a certain point in my career looking for an end game, that's when I merged my firm into Gresham Savage, and that was about 6 years ago. And basically, they took everybody got their job with the new firm, or at least got a fair opportunity, and most of them stayed on. So, and this was a firm that was looking to expand their presence into Riverside. That originated in San Bernardino County in 1910, actually. And so they wanted my book of business, ultimately. And so, I mean, that's obviously how another way you can grow. You can grow organically, or you can grow through mergers and acquisitions, which is just the way it is in all types of business.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the line between being an investor or an entrepreneur and being an advisor. So what you've heard tonight is a little bit about our discussion about how we found the law, how we came to practice the law as entrepreneurs ourselves. But now we both are business attorneys, and so we want to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a business attorney who's an entrepreneur and knows what it's like to run your own business. But at the same time, you're advising people who are entrepreneurs, okay? And all of you remember the definition of an entrepreneur, right? What is it? One who takes risk, right? Isn't that the definition? Entrepreneur is one who takes risk. So here we are, we're people who've taken risk, but the law by definition is about helping people manage risk, especially when we are talking about it in the terms of being business attorneys. And so we think it's important for you to maybe get a sense of what is maybe a unique problem, maybe not so unique, but it's certainly one that we face every day in the way we handle our clients. And so how about let's talk about the line between the advisor and the investor, and the issue of the objectivity and some of the deal making that entrepreneurs want you to engage in, and so on.
Obviously, ultimately, like Richard, I focus my practice in on business and corporate work, and there's nothing more rewarding than to work with some entrepreneurial type individuals who start from the ground up and build a business and make it successful. And I'm delighted whenever I can be a part of that as their legal counsel. But I think that it's a very dangerous and unwise thing to do, is to cross that line and go into business with clients. And as a business lawyer, you get lots of opportunities. A lot of times people are really short on cash flow, and they say, you know, I can't really afford your services, but I'll give you a piece of my business if you do this, and we're successful. I have never crossed that line, and I've seen lawyers do it and get in trouble. And the sad thing, the reality that we deal with, is that there are many, many businesses that start up with great ideas, with individuals who are smart, have ability, but they don't make it. And usually it's because, it's not so much that they don't understand how to do it, it's that they run out of capital and before they get over the hump to where the business can carry itself. And sometimes we can help them find capital, but I'm not going to be a source of capital as someone's lawyer, because I think it creates, if nothing else, it distorts your judgment in that you are now on both sides of the equation, and there's potential conflicts that come from that. So I just think it's a really bad idea. And I don't sit on clients' boards of directors. I've only made one exception in my career, and that turned out to be either I was going to lose my biggest book of business or I was going to do it, and it turned out to be a good ride, but that was very, very unusual, and I just think it's better if you're providing legal advice, you stay off to the side.
This is an important topic, because all of you in business courses, you've learned that the key thing that you have to keep in mind if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to be in business, or even if you're an employee or a manager or someone in the management level of a business, you always have to know what business you're in. And as obvious as that sounds, it is easy to forget. We're in the business of giving advice, legal advice, but that's what we do. And the minute we get brought into operations, to be honest, we suck. Maybe not Ken, you know, he may be better at operations than I am. Johnny can tell you I suck at operations, right, Johnny? Yeah, he's nodding his head. He's doing yes, okay. We're advisors. We run business, we run our business, but our business is the business of giving advice. The minute we cross that line and we are now a co-owner, a co-venturer with somebody else, we're into operations. And that isn't our strong suit. And as an attorney, if you decide that you're going to go into the practice of law and be in the business of law, which is to say be in the business of giving counsel to people in exchange for money, then you need to remember that that's your business. And the minute you cross the line and become an investor, you're not really giving counsel anymore, you're now engaged in operations. And it's a big difference. And I too have refused to sit on boards. Partly because our malpractice insurance asks us, are you sitting on the boards of any of your clients? You can, but they may specifically exclude any liability that comes out of you serving on that board as a result. Because think about it, as a carrier, they have to know, well, is this problem that we're now being sued for a problem that came as a result of you voting as a board member, or is this coming because you gave some bad legal advice and the company that's your client relied on that legal advice? So you see where the insurer gets a little bit of a heartburn on some of this stuff. And that is a perfect illustration of what the problem is. And it's true for almost any profession you go into, whichever, you know, even if it's not law, if you were going into medicine, if you're going to dentistry, the minute you have a patient or a customer that you're now engaged in business with, that relationship becomes complex. And it's confusing, and it's hard to know how to make decisions, it's hard to give advice, and it's hard to know where your interests break off from the others. Now there's a word that we haven't used here, but I'll throw it out. We're both fiduciaries to our client. The law imposes upon us a fiduciary duty, and to me the shortest and easiest way to explain what that is we are charged with the duty to put our client's interests ahead of our own. The minute we're a co-owner, co-venturer with a client, how do you do that? How do you do that? All right, so now we want to talk about advising other professions. You are sitting in the company here with Ken Stream, as you know, but he's the guy that was counsel to Gary Groves. Now, does anybody here know who Gary Groves is? Nobody? Not even you, Johnny?
Is that the landmark case?
No. Gary Groves is the founder of Pacific Physician Services, otherwise known as PPS. And PPS was the first management service organization, MSO, in the United States. Actually, I guess in the world, really. And it was this guy that architected that. Now, understand that here in California, and not in all states, we have something that's called the corporate practice of medicine prohibition. It means that doctors, physicians, are not allowed to have non-physicians invest in their business. Okay? So if you're a physician and you needed capital to expand your practice, guess what? All you can do is go over here and see DeVere and ask for a loan. But you can't come to your friends and neighbors, your angels, and ask them to invest in your medical practice. Or at least that's the way it used to be. But you're sitting in the room with the guy that figured out how to do it.
Well, yeah, California has always had restrictions against corporate practice of medicine, and also fee splitting and kickback regulations that come into play that have made it difficult for medical groups to basically raise capital in the capital markets. I was fortunate enough to hook up with a client early on, and Gary Groves is a physician who actually graduated from Loma Linda and lived in Redlands, and he was the most entrepreneurial physician that I've ever met. And I've worked with a lot of them, and unfortunately, you know, when doctors go to medical school, they don't have a chance to learn too much about business. They don't learn much about how to run a practice or how to build and structure entities. And some of them are willing to listen to advisors, and some of them have some entrepreneurial skills. And Dr. Groves was one that was the exception, and he always was thinking about trying to do things that nobody had done before. When I first met him was when I first started practicing. He had a little partnership with two other doctors, and what they did was they contracted with hospitals to provide emergency room coverage 24/7. Usually smaller hospitals in outlying areas that really didn't have the staff that gave them the ability to man the emergency rooms themselves. And so basically, I helped them structure. It started off with a partnership of 3. Quickly, one of them dropped out because he didn't want to work that hard. So it was 2, and the 2 of them stayed together for several years, and then the other one dropped out. And so Dr. Groves was the one that actually had the vision, and well, he was a real risk taker. If anybody that I've ever known was a risk taker. I can remember him mortgaging his house to expand his business. And he had a plane, and he would fly up to Lone Pine or places like that for a weekend, work 72 hours in an emergency room, and then come back and work in his office the next day. And so ultimately he built a pretty good business by hiring more and more physicians and getting contracts. But along about the middle 80s, about 84 or 85, we brought in this guy who was a real financial guru. He wasn't a physician. He was an MBA that just had a lot of experience in different types of business, mainly in hospitals. And I'm talking about Ronald Sitt. I don't know if you knew him. But we started looking at, and they started looking at the change in medicine. And they saw that this managed care concept was going to become popular, and a lot of the traditional groups and physicians really didn't believe it or didn't want to look at it. And so they just went out and started tying up the marketplace with and building primary care medical groups, and all throughout the whole Inland Empire to begin with. And basically saw the opportunity then to contract with the HMOs and the providers, sometimes on a capitated basis. And if it's done correctly, it can be very profitable, but it's very tricky. So basically the whole idea was they were building this big network and basically trying to expand and take advantage of the opportunities before the competitors got there, but realized that, hey, they were going to need several $1 million in capital and they didn't have it. So basically, we had always learned, we had always been told that you can't like Richard said, you can't bring in capital and put it in a professional practice like that. So we did figure out a way to do it with the help of a lot of smart people and getting some big firms that had connections to the Department of Corporations and the Attorney Generals and getting opinions. But basically what we did is we set up professional corporations that basically the doctors work, because you can't provide medical services through a corporation unless it's a professional corporation. And you can't bring in capital from the public markets to a professional corporation. So we set up management, a master management company called Pacific Physician Services. And we structured it so that the local professional corporations practice medicine, and basically the management company provided everything else. Turnkey facility, in many cases actually bought the buildings or built the buildings, and basically equipped them, did all the marketing, did all of the billing, did all of the hiring of non-professional staff, everything except practice medicine. And then we tied up all these groups to this management company with long-term, 20-year, non-cancelable management contracts, and we took it to Wall Street. And they were really skeptical. They just said, well, how are you going to keep these intact? Nobody's ever done this. How do you know it's going to be profitable? And so, it took a lot of work and a lot of tinkering with the models, but ultimately we did get to the point where Wall Street embraced it, and and the concept was starting to spread. There were other companies that were in the process of organizing at the same time we were. In fact, we were the first one out with a public offering in November of 1991, and Vicor was just a few months behind us. But basically, the company did succeed. We went through 3 public offerings, and Wall Street was really liking the model for the first few years. And we built the business into where we were operating in 22 states, and we were bringing about $500 million in revenues annually, and things were going well. We were buying up small practices and groups all over the country, and basically then entering into arrangements where we managed them. And there was enough money to keep Wall Street happy for a while, but the way it is with Wall Street is you got to show improvement in earnings quarter to quarter, and when that starts to level off, then the investors start jumping off the ship. So it was going through the usual cycle, but what happened then is our founder, Dr. Rose, lost his health, and so basically he was no longer able to really come to his office and work, and at that point we knew, and we tried to really low-key that because Wall Street runs on rumors, as you know, and ultimately we were quietly looking around for a partner. We ultimately found one. We merged the company into a company out of Birmingham, Alabama called Med Partners in February of 1996. So that was the end of the ride, but for me it had come to where I was a general counsel of a company that was in 22 states, and it was 90% of my practice. But I never let my firm go, and I always told everybody, if you're a lawyer, every client that you have, you're hired on a day-to-day basis, and it could end tomorrow, and everything does end sometime. And so this one did, but it was a good ride while it lasted, and it was a lot of fun.
So the takeaway on that one is this: if you respect your own profession, you'll respect other professions. And Ken respected the rules that applied to the medical profession, but at the same time helped him understand how those rules could be applied in a different way so that the capital could come in and do something that nobody had ever seen done before. And so just because somebody says, and he had lots of people telling him it wasn't going to work. Lots of people telling me it wasn't going to work, and it worked. All right, last, we told you we were going to cycle back around about community banking. The other cool thing is, and I'm actually a stockholder in this bank, but Ken has this passion about community banking. And so a few years ago, some of Ken's friends decided that they needed to form a bank, and I thought it might be worthwhile for you to hear what it's like to be a lawyer where you're advising other entrepreneurs into and guiding them through the process of creating something as highly regulated as a bank. So maybe tell us a little, we're running out of time, but maybe just give us a few words about Premier Service Bank.
I feel guilty. Richard is very kind. Richard is a fantastic lawyer in business and particularly healthcare, and I feel like I shouldn't be doing all the talking here, but I did mention to you that a community bank was really kind to me when I was first starting off, and I mentioned that it was Riverside National Bank, and Riverside National Bank got acquired by City National in about the mid-'80s, I think. But it was our bank locally. Every small business person wanted to deal with them because they had relationship bankers. And the banker that took care of me was someone then who moved on to a different bank when it got eaten up by this mid-sized bank out of Beverly Hills. So a few years after that, well, actually several years after that, about 1999, he was my banker. I followed him twice to different banks because it's relationship, and he took care of my needs, and he cared about his customers, and so I was loyal to him, and that's the way it has been traditionally in banking, although we're seeing some big changes here. But we were at a function, and he was telling me some of his problems with his new bank in terms of being able to serve some of the clients that I was referring to him, because obviously I tried to help out some of my clients if they needed capital or lines of credit or whatever. And he was complaining that the bank wasn't backing him up because they really weren't a business bank mentality. And so I just flippantly said, Kerry, his name is Kerry Pendergast, been my friend for 30 years. I said, we could always go start our own bank. And we just laughed. And then about a couple weeks later, he called me up and he said, when you made that comment, were you serious? And I said, well, I never really thought much about it, but there hadn't been a new charter in this area for over 20 years, and there's been a lot of consolidation, so why don't we look into it? So basically that's, how it got started. We found a consultant who told us you need at least $10 million in capital to start a bank, which I didn't think was all that much money. But we raised it. What we did is the two of us got as many of our contacts as we could to join us as organizers of the bank, and we put 12 people together. We all committed to put in a certain amount of money ourselves. And then we started raising capital. Well, we started the process of going through the application process to get a permit, which is not easy, but we were a state chartered bank, and so that's the DFI, the Department of Financial Institutions in California, that you deal with. And obviously they want to know that you're viable, they want to know that you have good bankers, and so obviously we had to go out and recruit our bankers, who would be our chief credit officer and our CEO and our chief financial officer, and they were all veteran bankers. So we got the approval, and then just as we got the permit to raise the capital, the .com market crashed, and this was right at the end of 2000. So we really had to scramble, but we ended up raising $10.3 million, just all in the local community here, about 800 shareholders. And we went out finally, and our first day of business was September 10, 2001, the day before 9/11. And so things got real quiet the next day. But we ultimately built it up to about $165 million in assets, and then came the big crash, So this story is not finished yet because we've been struggling with a loan portfolio where we've had a lot of commercial real estate that people have had to walk away from, get back to us. Construction lending where developers couldn't finish it, they give it back to you, you're stuck with it, you have to sell it. We ended up over 3 years losing about $6 million. So not every story is a good story. I mean, there's trials and tribulations, but right now there's a big consolidation move in banking, and the small community banks, unfortunately, it's going to be hard to see banks, start up like we did, at least in the foreseeable future. But we are in a process of merging with a bigger bank, which is about a $2 billion bank, and we're hoping to close that in July. But there's lots of hoops to jump through and lots of hurdles to get over. So always a challenge.
All right, we want to give you a chance to ask us some questions. Also, Devere, I don't know if you wanted to throw anything into the pot about anything we're talking about here, especially the banking. He's been involved in banking through his family for 60 years, right? Small, yeah. They formed his family formed a credit union. So, any questions that you have for Ken or myself about going into law, about practice, what it takes to get going? Yeah.
Do you feel like the name Savage attracted people to your law firm?
The question is, does the name Savage on the moniker of the law firm help the marketing?
It might be better for a hardball litigator to have a name like that, but no, Mr. Savage actually is retired, although his son works for us, but he was a very highly respected individual in the San Bernardino community. Our firm started back in, like I say, 1910, and it was an early business firm, and the clients that our firm had back then were Kaiser Steel and the Santa Fe Railroad, so we had a good background in business in terms of clientele.
I just have to throw it. One of the labor lawyers that I referred to works for his firm, and her last name is Rage. So you can go to Miss Rage over at Savage. All right, well, with that, we'll turn it back over to Cheryl.
Thank you, gentlemen.